or whatever it takes, by any means necessary. Failure is not an option, kind of grind.
Look at the way you see me coming, I'll knock you down, it won't be funny.
All right, so let's kick it off from the beginning once again. And just really taking us back to growing up, in Nativille of Kentucky. Growing up, you were the youngest of three siblings. Where there was some jealousy behind you being the youngest. How was that growing up?
It was all pretty good. I loved my brother because I was a tomboy. And of course, Mama never let us forget that he was the first boy in 3 generations. I never want to hear that again. And my older sister was more cerebral, reading and writing stories and things like that. While my brother Derek and I would be out on our bicycles or sliding down hills on cardboard boxes or sheets of cardboard. And it was fantastic. And even I love to tell the story about in 1966 when Mom and Grandmother piled us all in her 63 Falcon and drove all the way from Louisville, Kentucky to Southern California, stopping at all the sites along the way. That is the highlight of my childhood. Wow. And just collecting rocks, or we went to the Petrified Forest and the Great Crater, and we camped along the way and just had a wonderful family trip. And Grandmother couldn't drive a manual transmission, so Mama had to drive the whole way with just encouragement from the peanut gallery in the back. And so we had a wonderful time. And just on weekends going out and doing fun things. There really wasn't jealousy because Monica, my older sister, was into so many different things than Derek, my brother, and I. We were the outdoorsy ones. She was more humanities and the arts. Derek and I were more science and nature. And Mama loved both. So she really, really nurtured us and encouraged us and made us feel like we were rich, even though we weren't.
Wow. And, just hearing those stories of it seems so foreign when you hear, stories of like going outside and really taking in the nature. I feel like there's like that disconnect with new generations, right?
It's so true. I go into Washington, D.C. to the really poor schools, and they are predominantly African American. And I ask the students, what in this room came from the forest? And they can't tell me. And they have pencils and paper and books and wooden chairs and desks and all kinds of things. And they just have no idea. And some of the students I take to regional parks or just county parks to measure a tree height or learn to use a key and identify a tree or just something very simple. And some of them are afraid that lions and tigers and bears are going to get them right in an urban center. So we really have to get past that. And it sounds ridiculous, but if that's what you've seen on TV and you've only seen little splices and bits and pieces amongst the video games, you don't know what to expect. So these are real fears that these kids have. It's sad.
Yeah, and I definitely want to touch on that later. I read that you're working with elementary school kids, and even
Yes.
touching on that later on in our conversation, but wanting to take it back a little bit to your love for forestry. You talked a little bit about your mother's influence, going outside, taking those trips. What was the main decision about, and you spoke about it a little bit, going to the University of Washington, going and really majoring in forestry, not zoology?
Right.
Just kind of take us through that story.
Well, when Bruce Lee died, I became so infatuated with him and his life story. I don't know why I didn't pay attention to him while he was still alive. I had seen his movies and they were good, but it's just something about him burning out so young and being so disciplined and so wise and just a phenomenal person just touched my heart. And plus, my mom was really sick at that time. She died when I was only 15 and had, frankly, a suicide attempt when I was 13 years old. So it was really tough. And I think that's why I became so enamored with Bruce Lee. I needed an escape, something to think about besides taking care of mom. She died eventually of throat cancer. And it was really tough taking care of her all night and studying and then going to school. But Bruce Lee, he just really captured my imagination, my soul, my passion. And he had studied and taught Kung Fu, martial arts, in Seattle, Washington. So I went to college my first year at the University of Louisville, all the while planning to move to Seattle, Washington and go to the University of Washington. But I had to make sure my grandmother was healthy enough for me to leave. I had a ton of medical bills from my mom that needed to be paid. She had died again when I was 15, and I had just turned 17 when I graduated from high school in 1975. So 1976, I moved to Seattle so that I could study martial arts with someone who had practiced and learned under Bruce Lee. But unfortunately, the man who I studied with was more of a braggart than someone who seemed to have actually been with Bruce Lee. So I didn't practice with him very long. I went into Tai Chi Chuan, and that's the art that I still do to this day. But when I went to University of Washington, my major was still in zoology. And I found out that the College of Forest Resources had a wildlife management program. So I switched from zoology to wildlife management, then was recruited during a career fair by the Forest Service, USDA Forest Service, and they wanted a Black female forester and insisted that I change my major to forest management. So that is the truth about how I became a forester, because I love animals so much, and I still do to this day.
Wow, wow. And you hear the story of trials and tribulations. And let me just ask you, as a 15-year-old, I can't even imagine having to take care of bills and having that sort of strain on me. I hear my mom talk about her mother passed away of breast cancer when she was 7, and she was the second of
Wow.
4th child. Yeah. So, and she had breast cancer. I have my breast cancer shirt on today. So, I want to ask you, how long did it take you to cope with those things? Because I know being a child, even after that fact, and having people in your life, looking at Bruce Lee as someone to inspire you, but really, how long did
Yes.
it take you to cope with that?
I am still coping with that. I'm not kidding. I have clinical depression from a lot of things that happened to me when I was a child and during my 28-year career with the Forest Service. As you know, I was raped and sexually assaulted several times and endured a hostile work environment. So I still to this day, every Friday, meet with my psychologist to deal with some of those issues that I tucked away so that I could keep performing at a high level.
Mhm.
And I just really think getting counseling, and I'm on medication too to help with my depression. I think we need to be more open in talking about it because it's a way to be healthy, strong, and put together and able to still function at a high level. Depression is real, it's an illness like any other illness. And there's some things that I think I'll be dealing with for the rest of my life. There are other things I've been able to deal with my therapist and process out so that they're not haunting me anymore. But my mom dying, she died of throat cancer, as I mentioned. So that was a really tough thing to watch. And then grandmother had breast cancer. We thought it was breast cancer. It first exhibited itself in her breast, but she actually had what's called angiosarcoma, which is lining of the blood vessels, the cancer, so it spread everywhere. So 6 years after I lost my mom, I lost my grandmother. And we grew up in grandmother's house. I talk about grandmother a lot because she and mom raised me. They were my two parents. My father wasn't in my life, and thank goodness, because he was not a nice person.
Mm. Mm. You know, a grandmother's love and a mother's love is like no other. And,
Like no other.
like no other. And I kind of read into your story. And there was one point in your life you went to a career fair, and that was kind of when things changed for you. Can you think of
Yes.
that moment in, dealing with all of the trials and tribulations, and then thinking back to a mother's love and a grandmother's love that push you to go to that
Yes.
career day, not knowing that it would literally change your life?
My whole life. I'm still inspired by my mom and my grandmother. I can still hear the words that they said to me and feel the love that they had for me. All of that to this day protects me and makes me able to stay strong. Mama named me Starya, Melody Starya Mobley, and Starya is my Cherokee name. It means stay strong. We're a quarter Cherokee, my siblings and I. Mom's dad was full blood Cherokee. So I think while I was in her tummy, she must have had an inkling of what I was going to go through to name me that. Because I really am Starya, staying strong and powerful throughout all the things that have happened. And that career fair, I wasn't even going to go because the Forest Service was going to be there. And I thought, I don't know for sure that I want to work for the Forest Service or forestry organization. Maybe I want to switch my major back to zoology, out of wildlife, and study zoology, get my PhD and do something there. I just didn't know exactly where I was going to land. But my friends were going. They said, "You're crazy if you don't go." And I was offered a permanent position. And even before that, there was a Society of American Foresters meeting that I just happened to go to because a woman I worked with at college was going to go to that meeting. And I met a man that night, Lyle Laverty, who said that he was going to hire me. And sure enough, when the career fair came and the Forest Service talked with me, they offered me a position on Lyle's unit. So everything happened for a reason. You never know how one little thing can affect your entire life, really affect your entire life.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That was the turning point for you. So
It
I've heard,
was.
the streets say.
Yes,
But
it
while
was.
at school, were there ever any factors outside of the things you were dealing with internally that they pretty much stopped you from doing forestry? Were there people that were like, trying to tear you down? And how did you get around those circumstances?
I leaned a lot on the strength that mama and grandmother put in me because at the University of Washington and the College of Forest Resources, there were no other African Americans. I was the only one. I was the only female African American in all of my classes that had to do with forestry. Now, physics, economics, those sorts of things that would have 200 or 300 people, there would be some people of color there, but then you're just a body, it's really hard to connect. So in my forestry classes, it was really tough. I was the brunt of all the jokes and called the N word routinely. And Seattle is not known for having a bunch of African Americans anyway. or Washington State, period. It's not like the East Coast. So I had to get used to that. But one thing that helped me was Mama had sent us to white junior high schools and predominantly white high schools. So I was used to being the only person of color. I had 6 years to get used to that. So it wasn't that foreign to me when in 1987, when I was working in Florida, I went to a Black dance club. And I've never been more uncomfortable in my life because I wasn't used to being around in a room filled with Black people. I had been around only white people for so long. So I couldn't believe it. I said, you should be so comfortable here. And now, of course, I'm grown, I'm 65. It took me a few years to get used to being in rooms with all Black people. But I'm home now, so I can go around whites, Blacks, Indians, Asians, you name it. I'm comfortable.
Look, the versatility also comes in handy, being around kids. I know you already know how sometimes it can be intimidating for children when they aren't around people of the same color, pretty much,
Yes, very
and for
much so.
yeah, and even taking that skill set that you learned in high school and junior high at college, and now we're putting it in the US Forest Service. Take us
Yes.
through your first day walking into the office. And was it a shock to you? Was it like, oh my gosh, I'm the first woman younger than 21, to be able to
Yes.
working for the US Forest Service? How was that?
Well, I didn't know I was the first Black female forester for several months. I knew looking around, there were no people of color at all. It was predominantly older white males and some white females. The white females were doing the clerical work, the men were the foresters. So, my first season, the first day going, it was wonderful. They had me learning about every shop in the Forest Service, every discipline like reforestation, genetics and tree improvement, timber sale layout, straight timber sales, fire management, wildlife management, minerals and geology, all of that. And so it was so interesting. You didn't have time to get bored. And so I thought, my goodness, of course I want to be a forester. Of course I want to do this. How wonderful. Well, then the next year, I wasn't on orientation anymore. I just had a job. And it was doing the same thing over and over and over, laying out timber sales. Same measurement thousands of times. I've never been more bored in my life. And I said, I can't do this. I just can't. So I switched my major back to wildlife management. I said, I'm going to be a wildlife biologist. And the Forest Service learned that I had done that. And they said, oh, no, no, no. If you want to keep this permanent job, you have to be a forester. So I kind of went kicking and screaming, but it turned out to be the best thing in the world for me in my career.
Wow, wow. So pretty much that conversation of them basically saying, you can't leave us. If you change your major, then hey, you're
That's
out the
it,
door.
out the door. Yeah.
Wow.
And I pouted for a long time about that. My
Uh-huh.
grades started sliding because I said, passive aggressive response. It
Mhm.
I said, I don't want to do this, but I have to have this job because by then grandmother was really sick with the cancer. So I knew I hadn't paid off all of mama's bills yet. And I hear grandmother was really sick and racking up the chemotherapy and all of that. So, oh, I just felt buried. And unfortunately, my brother and my sister didn't feel compelled to help pay for anything, and they were out kind of living their lives, and I was the one always to take care of mama. Derek and Monica were in college. They're 4 and 5 years older than me,
Mhm.
and they were kind of living their lives while I was at home taking care of mom and then grandmother. So it
Wow.
was tough.
Wow. So balancing work, school, going back to Kentucky from basically both sides of the country, was
Yes,
there ever a time where you felt like I just want to give up? And if you did,
many times.
how did you get through that feeling?
This is going to sound crazy, but I pray. I have a strong faith in God. I happen to be Christian. I switch my denomination around all the time, but I do believe in Jesus Christ as my savior. And I would pray and pray. And I had good mentors, thanks to God. Good people in my life who had power and influence at the college or in the Forest Service and who had my best interests at heart and supported me all the way through. To this day, I still have mentors that help me. And I can't say enough about how important it is to have a mentor or two or three because you use them different ways. And kids today maybe don't realize that it's a good thing to have a mentor, somebody with some power and influence, and someone who has your best interest at heart. That was critical to me in being successful.
And having those positive, I guess I'm trying to say positive feedback, but honestly, like just those positive voices in your life.
Yes,
You even talked about earlier the impact and the influence of Bruce Lee. And one quote,
yes,
of course, one quote that comes to me, and everyone knows, be like water, making its way through
yes,
the cracks. Don't be assertive, but adjust to the object, and you shall find a way around or through it. And that quote, literally, I knowing that quote, but hearing your story, it literally resonates, like it literally falls into place. So let's talk about the lessons of being like water to move around your
yes,
adversities and circumstances while at the US Forest Service. We talked about trials and tribulations, but the good thing about you, you never let those situations define you. So can you
never.
talk about how you overcame those situations and those circumstances to not let them define who you are and to persevere to inspire others?
I care so much about other people and making a positive difference in our world, frankly. I always thought this is temporary. I know I can get through this. And I want to make it better so that the next woman of color, or the next man who doesn't have to go through this again. No one should have someone laying hands on their body. And I was physically assaulted twice at 14th and Independence in downtown DC and had to call the police to help me because my colleagues would not. So when you're going through that from the beginning of your career through the 28 years later, it's kind of discouraging because you want to think that by going through something and speaking about it, not keeping it a dirty little secret, that things will change. And my worry and concern, and the reason that I'm so outspoken today, is that women, especially women on fire crews, are still being assaulted. But being like water, water is so strong. I mean, it can wear a little crack in a rock and then bust a boulder apart if it wants to. And it just takes a little trickle. It doesn't take a big, flood of water to do that. Although a flood of water is pretty powerful too. Be like water. Bruce Lee, really, his support of my psyche is just legendary, I think, because he did so much for me and didn't even know that the memory of him was helping me so much.
What were some of the memorable parts of being a forester? What were some of your favorite parts? Whether it was a place you've never been to before, a conversation you had, just, lead us through those moments that you truly hold
Yes.
near and dear to your heart.
One of the main memories that I cherish is, of course, we wore hard hats because we're walking through the woods, and if a branch falls from a high distance, it can really hurt you. They call them widow makers for that reason. So I would take my hard hat off at lunchtime and be able to just collect berries, blueberries and salmon berries and other kind of berries to have for lunch just fresh right off the shrub. And I could sit and look across the valley at a mountain. I was in Skykomish, Washington. It's a beautiful district, and see the Cascade Mountains with snow caps and just gorgeous things, and see sheep, wild sheep, and hawks and eagles. To be by a stream and see over 100 eagles eating salmon from the stream, and being able to drink right out of a stream. Although you have to be very careful and know which stream you can drink out of and which one you shouldn't, because you can get real sick doing that. But I never did, because I knew which ones were a little bit safer. But just being outdoors, those wonderful things. And then the other things I think about are going to meetings and being able to speak my truth and speak out, because people had never seen or heard anyone do that, especially someone who stood out because she has brown skin and a big space in her teeth and nappy hair. So they could all spot me, and so after I would speak out at a conference, we'd have a break, and so many women would come to me and say, "Oh, Melody, the same thing's been happening to me. Thank you for saying that. Maybe we can change that."
Wow.
Another memory that I have that I love is meeting with Secretary Glickman, Secretary of Agriculture. He was at what we called a family meeting in the Forest Service. They say the Forest Service family, not the Forest Service organization. And the press was there, and he was talking about stuff going on in agriculture, and he took questions, and I said, people are suffering, hurting, and nothing is being done about that, and you need to know. And he said, can you provide proof that this is happening? I said, yes, sir, I'd love to meet with you and bring some proof. So he met with me. It was me and my records, my papers, and him and his attorney and his staff, and about 8 or 9 people versus me across the table, just me sitting there. And he listened. He didn't do a darn thing to make a difference, but at least he listened. So I appreciated that. And I took a lot of heat for that, because of course the Forest Service didn't want me meeting with the Secretary of Agriculture and talking about the bad things that the Forest Service was doing. But I cherish it as a good memory. I really do. A chance to start making a difference, maybe.
Wow. Wow. And, that's a testimony. You spoke on this about other women looking at you as an inspiration. I've seen pictures of you with beautiful braids or a beautiful fro, and, just being comfortable in your skin. For any person that's watching, talk about the message behind just being comfortable in your skin, the only Black woman in a room. Can you give someone any sort of inspiration or motivation about it's okay to be the only Black woman, pretty much? It's okay.
It is okay, Maya. And it's good to open those doors. And the main thing is to be superb in your discipline. Know your science, know your arts, whatever it is, be the best you can possibly be. Because if not, the door may be open and you may be invited in, but you may not be promoted, you may not be retained, and those sorts of things. So it's an opportunity. The way I got through it is thinking it's an opportunity to make a difference for that next person that's coming along. And my spirit of wanting to make a difference for the next person is so strong within me that I could bear almost anything if I thought it was worthwhile for the next person coming.
Right.
Not everybody can do that, but I believe that most people down in their heart really do care and want to make a difference. And that's a good way to find that inner strength.